Funding for the Lazy Bedhead channel was provided by viewers like you. Thank you.
Factor is a meal prep service that sends you prepared food options for breakfast, lunch, and dinner right to your door. Fresh and easy meals in a matter of minutes. Factor's menus are updated weekly to include 27 plus meals and 34 plus add-on options. Choose your favorite meals or let them craft your order based on your taste preferences and meal history. Going onto the Factor website or getting their app helps you customize your weekly meal plans from 4 meals a week to 18 scheduled meals, so you'll never have to stress about what you should prep for dinner. Factor has all of that planned out for you. Service is a great way to manage and maintain a healthier lifestyle by providing meal preferences for whatever diet you want to try. So instead of losing food and money buying groceries, you'll be losing weight with Calorie Smart or keto options. Or if you want to make those gains, there's also the Protein Plus option. Or maybe you just want to change up your diet completely and have an all-natural meal plan. Vegetarian and vegan options are available as well. And the best part is, the food is delicious! Factor doesn't just have meal prep, but also add-on options as well, with juice and smoothie bundles that'll give you a little something to grab while you're on the go. It's so convenient, so easy, so simple, no extra hassle, no meal prep, and no dishes? I mean, come on, what more do you want from me? Alright, fine, I'll add this too, just to sweeten the deal. If you use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use code FACTOR, SE, 35501, you can get 50% off of your first box. You'll be spending 50% less than you would going to the grocery store and buying groceries. So what are you waiting for? Click the link below or use code FACTOR-SE 35501 at go.factor75.com. Thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring this video, and now back to your regularly scheduled whatever. A tale as old as time. Adventure, death, love, tragedy, war, victory. These are the elements that make a story of an epic adventure so epic. Storytellers have been creating these immaculate tales of heroic bravery and the strength of man since the very beginning of time. These symbolic characters of hope are what every person inspires to be. Though these feats of Homeric proportions are but fictitious, the heroes of today inspire to be those characters and crave those inherited traits that exuberate on the page. The men that are gifted with bravery, wit, talent, charm, and grand leadership. Those who make positive role models aspire. But even the bravest and most daring warriors have their flaws. But without those, what makes these heroes of old so relatable, other than they're human? Positives and flaws and all. With these tales of grand fantasy, it is often a place that those who seek out an escape from the monotony will go and inspire their imagination and drive for adventure. The fantastical world of monsters and demons and creatures otherworldly makes for a world of excitement and vast exploration. And so long as writers and storytellers are inspired by the escape, the land of endless possibilities will forever be expansive and adaptable and open for more minds to conquer. I say all of this to preface that these stories of adventure are so widely known and preserved and passed down today because of how exciting the concept came to an audience back then when it was first written, and how these stories are still inspiring a modern day audience. Stories that age this well within the newest centuries show to be so moving that they are being adapted and referenced when newer writers are spinning their own epic tales. Case in point, Epic the Musical. You didn't think it would go down this route with all that fancy wordplay, did ya? Epic the Musical is a loose musical adaptation of one of the oldest and most referenced adventure poems ever written, the Odyssey, by Homer. The Odyssey is one of two major Greek poems that was later divided amongst 24 books. The original Odyssey is still widely read to this day, and gaining a modern-day adaptation with Epic the Musical. Now, Epic the Musical is a collaborative piece created by George Rivera Hernandez. Nicknamed Jay, George is a playwright, composer, lyricist, and actor. His project first gained its footing on TikTok, where he garnered well over 50 million views over the course of showing clips from the musical that he had been working on that was loosely inspired by the Odyssey. So far, 2 albums of the project have been completed, with the Troy Saga and the Cyclops Saga, and I intend to explain the story of Epic the Musical today as we go over the entirety of Homer's The Odyssey. It's probably going to be a very long video, so sit back, relax, put on a nice comfy toga, and why don't you come down this journey with me where everything here is ancient Greece. So, the thing you need to understand about the Odyssey story is that it technically starts in the middle of the adventure. It drops you in like a weird place chronologically because the story in the beginning focuses primarily on the end of the Trojan War. The Trojan War was a conflict that started between the people of Troy and the Achaeans, or as they're commonly referred to today as the Greeks. Now, in order to kind of explain how the Trojan War plays into the Odyssey, I have to give a brief history on what the Trojan War conflict was. Now, there are many, and I mean many, different accounts of what happened during the Trojan War that kind of contradict each other's timelines, and it makes following the events of the war and the characters involved kind of confusing to understand. But since I don't want to harp on explaining the origins of this conflict for super duper long, because the Odyssey is already a pretty long story as is, I'm just gonna give you the Cliff Notes version. Got it? Cool. Okay, let's go. It is the 12th century on the Saronic islands of Aegina. Yes, that is how you pronounce that. But I am your teacher, and we're going to be mature about this.
Aegina. Funny.
An argument broke out between Hera, the god of the gods, wife of Zeus and goddess of marriage and women, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, warfare, and handicraft, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Now, Irus, who is the goddess of strife and discord, not that one, was not invited to Peleus' and Thetis' wedding, the new king and queen of Aegina. And no, it's not fetus, it's Thetis. Look, it's Greek, I don't know. Peleus was the king of the island, son to Aeacus and Endius. And Thetis is a variety character that takes on many roles depending on what accountment you read. She's often depicted in Greek mythos as a sea nymph, but sometimes she's referred to as the goddess of water, or she's one of the many daughters of the ancient sea god Nereus. Not that any of that is like super important in knowing, but what is important in knowing who these two are is that Peleus and Thetis would have a son, and that son would be the great Greek warrior Achilles, and we'll return to him later as we further get into Odyssey. So, Irus is a bit upset that she wasn't invited to this union, but all the other gods and goddesses are like partying it up, right? So like the party crasher that she is, she decided even though that she wasn't invited to this wedding, she's just gonna show up anyways. But Irus wanted to throw a practical prank just to spite the goddesses that were invited instead of her. So as a gift to the newlywed couple, Irus brought a golden apple. And inscribed in that apple was the phrase, "To the Now, this is where the tea starts getting hot, because all three goddesses claimed their right to be the fairest. I mean, you got that whole story of Athena transforming some woman into a spider for daring to say that she was more talented than she was. You also got Aphrodite practicing whatever weird intersex kink that she had when she made a mother's daughter marry her husband or the daughter's father, all because the woman claimed that her daughter was more beautiful than Aphrodite. And Hera, she's just having a bad week, honestly. Like, she's the queen of the gods, but her husband kind of treats her as a side piece, and her self-esteem is really affected by this, so she can honestly just use a bone being tossed her way. So none of the goddesses can decide who the fairest is, and no one's really interested in marrying their own fathers or being transformed into a bug, so they refer to Zeus. So they ask Zeus to settle their feud, and Zeus is all like, well, I don't want to get involved in any of this women business, it's too much drama for me. So instead of just settling this himself, he refers to a random shepherd that was just passing by to decide who was the fairest, pushing all of the responsibility to settle an argument amongst literal deities on some random mortal. But the goddesses are all offering a bribe for this guy's vote. So immediately they're just corrupting democracy, as you do. Hera offers the shepherd power, Athena offers her wisdom, and Aphrodite offers love. Now, you're probably wondering who this random shepherd is. Well, this is none other than Paris, the Prince of Troy. He was raised in the countryside and was a child of Priam and Hecuba, the last rulers of Troy before the beginning of the Trojan War. Just before Paris was born, his mother dreamt that she would give birth to a flaming torch. And instead of telling her that she was probably just playing way too much Minecraft or something, the seer predicted that her son would be the downfall of the entire Troy Empire. So when Paris was born, his parents decided in order to spare the kingdom, they would have to kill their son. But they couldn't bring themselves to do it. So instead, they asked their chief herdsman, Agulus. So Agulus took the child from the castle grounds to have him executed outside the palace. But Agulus also did not want to kill Paris. So instead of just outright killing him, he just left him exposed on a mountain in hopes that maybe he'll either just freeze to death or some animal might eat him or something. But the bears in the mountains would actually take care of Paris until Agulus came back 9 days later. Amazed that a newborn somehow managed to live for this long, Agulus just decided, you know what? Even if you are going to be the downfall of my entire home and country, you're alright, you can come with me. And just like the huntsman from Snow White bringing back a pig's heart to the evil queen, Agulus would do the old switcheroo and bring back a dog's tongue as proof that the son of Troy was dead. When, in actuality, Paris was raised to be a farmhead off in the countryside. So, cut back to the judgment of Paris. The goddesses are all bribing Paris to choose, but he's still being indecisive. So, Aphrodite threw in a curveball and offered Helen of Sparta. Helen was already married to King Menelaus. Regardless of that fact, Aphrodite decided to be a homewrecker and made Helen fall in love with Paris. I'm telling you, she broke like the most important rule in the rulebook. You can't make people fall in love with you. Now, in choosing Aphrodite, not only does Paris make an enemy out of the two most powerful Greek goddesses ever, but also King Menelaus was not very happy. After this random country boy took his woman away, he called upon all of the kings and princes of Greece to wage war on Troy. And it's like, honestly, at this point, pulling an Oedipus or being in the next installment of Honey, I Shrunk the Shepherd sounds more desirable than the hellstorm that Troy was about to go through. So for 20 years, the Greeks and the Trojans waged war on each other. The Trojan War ended with the greatest backstab ever written in literature, the Trojan horse. This wooden statue was gifted to the people of Troy by the Greeks as a sign of their surrender, only for a bunch of Greek mighty warriors to be hiding inside. And once they breached the walls, they slaughtered every last Trojan warrior, and thus ending the Trojan War. So in conclusion, those ladies screwed Paris over massively, and Zeus is the worst. Homer's Odyssey has been translated multiple times over, and with each new iteration, there has been additional content added by different authors offering a new perspective of the Trojan War story. So it's kind of heavily debated whether today's iteration of the Odyssey story is still the original text of Homer, or if there are added lines in the book that Homer did not originally write. And this is important to mention because I think it's important to talk about the original creator of the story. Now, Homer was a Greek poet who was well known for the Odyssey story, but before these poems were written, Homer created something known as the Iliad, another set of poems that was divided amongst 24 books. Now, the Iliad works as a precursor to the Odyssey because technically, The Iliad was the story about the Trojan War, whilst Odyssey more focuses on the journey back from war. The Iliad is set in the final weeks following the battle between King Agamemnon and Achilles, and although it's not essential to read the Iliad before reading Odyssey, because the Iliad isn't necessarily a prequel to Odyssey, a lot of the things that happen in the Iliad are referenced in Odyssey though. Now, Homer is the founding father of what is known today as the Homeric epic, or the epic Greek storytelling that makes up the foundation for how most Greek myth is written today. Homer didn't just shape how the Greeks would tell stories, he is well established as the teacher of Greek culture. In the Divine Comedy, author Dante Alighieri would reference Homer, referencing him as the poet sovereign, or the king of all poets. Homer is outlived by his own work, as further information about his life is pretty unknown. It's even debated by scholars today if Homer was even a real person. But if Homer was a real person, all that we really know of him was that he was a born native to Ionia. And what's interesting is that some portrayals of Homer from the ancient accounts rumor that the author was actually a blind man who was illiterate, and most of his stories were oral retellings that were written down by his followers. So now that we have discussed the author and the previous work with the Iliad, let's talk about the hero of today's story. There's gonna be a lot of names coming your way, a lot of those I will poorly mispronounce, but try to keep up. It's gonna be a long video. Our story begins with Book 1, when Athena visits Telemachus. Telemachus is the son of our main antagonist of the story, Odysseus, the king of Ithaca. Ithaca is depicted in the fictional depiction of Homer's map of Greece, and it is west of the Ungaea Sea. Now, despite the main character of the Odyssey being Odysseus, the first 4 books, or 4 poems, actually follow Telemachus, who is searching for his father, who is yet to return home from the Trojan War. In Book 1, the beginning stanzas explain the final events of the Trojan War, and that the hero Odysseus had invoked the wrath of the god of the sea, Poseidon, when he fought and blinded Poseidon's son, Polyphemus, the Cyclops. The last known whereabouts of Odysseus were that he was stuck on an island. This island, Ogygia, was the island of the goddess Calypso. During this time, many suitors would try and elope with Odysseus' wife, Penelope. So Penelope's suitors are pining for power over Ithaca, and Telemachus is powerless to do anything about it, and is subsiding with the idea that his father might not be alive anymore. That was until Odysseus' old friend Mentes approaches Telemachus with the news that his father is actually still alive, and he would be returning home very soon. Mentes is actually Athena in disguise, and she urges Telemachus to travel with her to Pylos and Sparta. During this time, Penelope is beside herself listening to the court's bard. Very similar to the Iliad, the Odyssey has different bard characters that would continue the narrative as they explain the events of the Trojan War. This is where the story kind of like jumps around between present time and the past, when bards would sing songs that would explain the events of the war. The first book ends with Telemachus suspecting that Mentes was actually Athena the entire time, and dismisses the suitors from his estate to go and seek out his father. Telemachus calls for an assembly of the elders of Ithaca. The elders of Ithaca have been sending their sons to court Penelope, but they try to save face when they congratulate Telemachus on taking Odysseus' place on the throne. Telemachus woes about the loss of his father and their homeland to their sons trying to marry his mother. Now, one of these suitors, Antinous, would point the finger at Penelope and say that she would flirt and lead on all of the suitors, but then never actually commit to any of them. Penelope had assured the elders that she would choose a husband when she was finished weaving a burial shroud for her father-in-law. But the poem also reveals that she would undo her knitting work so that she could never actually complete it. However, she can't keep stalling forever, because if Penelope doesn't choose a suitor, then Antinous is just gonna step in and choose for her. Telemachus doesn't take any of this very kindly at all. He invokes the power of the gods to punish all of the suitors. In that very moment, 2 eagles fought above the assembly, and the seer, Halitherses, would see this as a sign that Odysseus was still alive, and that the suitors would face massacre for trying to court Penelope. And if you ask me, I say Halitherses is hella thirsty for something else, you know what I mean? This doesn't shake the suitors at all, and the meeting is deadlocked at that point, with the suitors still pursuing Penelope. Telemachus prepares to leave for Pylos as Athena once again approaches him, this time disguised as a mentor. She tells Telemachus that his journey should prove to be fruitful, and since Telemachus has yet to tell anyone where he's going, Athena would then disguise herself as Telemachus as well as the mentor. So Telemachus, or Athena disguised as Telemachus, can stay behind to not upset Penelope, whilst the mentor Athena would travel with the real Telemachus. Book 2 ends with Telemachus leaving out for sea. Book 3 begins when Telemachus and Athena, who is disguised as a mentor, travel to Pylos. Once they arrive, Telemachus seeks out Nestor, the city's king. Pylos is a very religious city that worships Poseidon, and when Telemachus arrives, he witnesses a ritual that the city performs where they sacrifice bulls to the sea to appease Poseidon. When Telemachus approaches Nestor about obtaining any information on his father's whereabouts, Nestor claims to know nothing. However, what Nestor could recall was a fight that broke out at the fall of Troy between the two brothers who led the opposition, King Agamemnon and Menelaus. When the battle was over, Menelaus would head back to Greece. Meanwhile, Agamemnon wanted to stay behind and continue to sacrifice Trojans to Poseidon. Whilst Nestor would take his leave with Menelaus, Odysseus would stay behind with Agamemnon. Now, when asking about more information on Agamemnon, Nestor retells that Agamemnon returned home to Argolis, only to find out that Aegisthus had seduced and married his wife, Clytemnestra. Aegisthus was Clytemnestra's lover who stayed behind when the Greeks were sent to war in Troy. When Agamemnon returned, he was ushered to the feasting hall, and it was there that his wife and Aegisthus would ambush him and Cassandra, the princess of Troy, who was taken by Agamemnon and spared for her abilities to see the future. If only her future vision worked to see that regardless of whether she was spared or not, she was gonna get murked by the Greeks regardless. Now, that's just according to the Odyssey, but according to different writings, Agamemnon was killed by just his wife while he slept. And it was not because she was having an affair. It was because Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter for victory in the Trojan War. Other accounts would also say that both lovers killed Agamemnon with an axe. Some would say he was stabbed to death in his bathhouse. Regardless, at this point in the story, Agamemnon is... Now, Aegisthus would have taken place as king if it were not for Orestes. Orestes was Agamemnon's son, who had traveled to Athens but had returned when he heard that his father had returned from war, only to find that Aegisthus murdered his father. And to avenge his father's death, Orestes killed both his mother and her lover. Telemachus thanks Nestor and then prepares to leave for Sparta. But before he leaves Pylos, Nestor insists that he takes his son with him, that son being Pisistratus. Now, after the Trojan War and ridding of the traitorous Paris and Hector, Menelaus was able to obtain back his wife, Helen of Sparta. When returning from the Trojan War, Menelaus hosts a celebratory banquet for the separate unions of their son and daughter. When Telemachus arrives to Sparta, Menelaus recognizes him immediately as the son of the great Greek hero Odysseus, and welcomes him into his home. Whilst they're all feasting, Helen and Menelaus would recount how clever and brave Odysseus was, as Helen would recall that he once disguised himself as a beggar to infiltrate the walls of Troy. This is gonna make a comeback later. Meanwhile, Menelaus is recounting the tale of the Trojan horse. At this point, I would like to try and weave the songs from Epic the Musical. In the song The Horse and the Infant, it goes over the Trojan horse plot to take down Troy. In the lyrics, Odysseus takes command of the warriors and leads on the charge.
Diomedes will lead the charge, Agamemnon will flank the yards, Menelaus will let on make through the gates to take the whole city at large. Teucer will shoot any ambush attacking, little Ajax will stay back, Nestor secure Helen and protect her, Leo avenge your father, kill the brothers of Hector. Yes, sir. Find that inner strength now, use that well of pride, fight through every pain now, ask yourself inside, what do you live for, what do you try for, what do you wish for, what do you fight for, what do you live for, what do you try for, what do you wish for, what do you fight for.
And this is still somewhat accurate in Odyssey because Menelaus would recount that Odysseus was the one who originally thought of the Trojan horse plot. Now, we can get more into the albums in just a minute because the following tells how the house of Hector was slaughtered, as well as his infant son being thrown off of the wall on Styanax. But we're not to that song yet because, it slaps, and I want to save it for later. Menelaus recounts that the seer Proteus guided him back home to Troy, as well as tell him the fate of his brother in arms, Agamemnon. He was also told by the seer that Odysseus was trapped on Ogygia. So, Telemachus and Pisistratus set sails back to Ithaca. Back in Ithaca, however, a plot was brewing to ambush Telemachus.
Haven't you noticed who's missing? Don't you know the prince is not around? I heard he's on a diplomatic mission, and I heard today he comes back to town. So I say we gather near the beaches, I say we wait till he arrives. Then when he docks his ship we can breach it. Let us leave now, today we can strike and hold him down till the boy stops shaking. Hold him down while I slit his throat. Hold him down while I slowly break his pride, his trust, his faith, and his bones. Cut him down into tiny pieces. Throw him down in the great beam.
The Suitors found out that he had left Ithaca and were planning to take him out for daring to deny them his mother's hand in marriage. This prompts a herald, Medon, to report back to Penelope, who is distraught at the idea of losing her son right after losing her husband. In that moment, Athena sends a message through yet another disguise, the ghost of Penelope's late sister, Etham, who assures her not to worry and that the gods would protect her and her son. So, the first 4 books of the Odyssey are known as the Telemachy, which foretells the story of Telemachus becoming a man and filling in his father's shoes whilst he's away. But now that those 4 books are done and over with, we can finally catch up with our main hero, Odysseus. So by the time that we get to book 5, we finally catch up with Odysseus. So, during the time that Telemachus is looking for his dad, he's been hanging out with Calypso, the sea nymph that imprisoned him on her island for 7 years. Now, this entire time that all of the events are taking place, the Greek gods are watching over all of this. In the beginning of Book 5, we start with Zeus and the other gods watching over the current happenings. Athena is still advocating for Odysseus' safe return, while Poseidon is absent. Now, there is a reason why Poseidon isn't the biggest fan of Odysseus. We already know that he blinded his son, the Cyclops. But Athena is really pining for Odysseus, and this is because in the Odyssey, Athena helps Odysseus during the Battle of Polyphemus. Athena is also seen intervening just in time to help Odysseus many times throughout the Iliad and the Odyssey. Later on in Book 13, Athena would explain that she essentially serves as Odysseus' protector. As Odysseus worships her wisdom and power, he is awarded with her protection at any time. You'll see this intervention as we summarize Book 5. So, Calypso is informed by Hermes of Zeus's command to Athena to assure Odysseus' safe passage home, to which she agrees to finally let Odysseus leave her island. The only reason Odysseus was there in the first place was because Calypso was in love with Odysseus and promised him eternal life if he stayed with her. But he had already been away from home for so many years that at this point he would just rather go home. So not wanting to cross Zeus, she gives Odysseus a raft and supplies, and gave Hermes directions to lead Odysseus back home to Ithaca. So when the gods were arranging to give aid to Odysseus, Poseidon wasn't there, and that was because he was visiting Ethiopia. When he returned to his seas, he notices that Odysseus is traveling on his shores, and that man's got a bone to pick. So he lifts up his trident and starts throwing haymakers at this guy. He commands a massive storm to drown Odysseus, but Athena intervenes. Odysseus narrowly escapes and is shipwrecked on the shorelines of Scheria. So books 5 through 8 are structured as the adventures with the Phaecians. The Phaecians are the island residents of Scheria, and they're known in myth as the type of people who would help traveling sailors return home when they got lost. However, you have to gain their favor, otherwise they're pretty xenophobic to outsiders. At the beginning of Book 6, we are introduced to Princess Nausicca, the daughter of King Alcinous. Athena appears before Nausicaa as a friend in a dream. She tells Nausicaa to go to the river the next day and watch her clothes. The reason why Athena tells her to do this is because she's trying to set an encounter up between the Phaecians and Odysseus. Whilst the Phaeacian ladies are washing their clothes nude, they encountered an also nude Odysseus, who approaches them as he had just woken up from his crash on their shores. Odysseus, as modest as he can, given the circumstances, ask for help, but he doesn't make it a point to reveal who he really is. Nausicaa washes the dirt and wounds of the warrior, while Athena is really hyping her boy up as this handsome guy that just washed up on the shore, and Nausicaa starts to fall in love with this mysterious stranger. I don't know why Athena does this. I mean, she knows that Odysseus is married already. I don't know why all the Greek goddesses are homewreckers for some reason. The girl insists that Odysseus stays to be entertained by the king and queen of the Phaeacians. So books 7 and 8 are really just a bunch of filler. The main story beats we get at this point of the story is that Odysseus is meeting with Queen Arute and begging for her protection on the island. This is also the 2 books where we meet King Alcinous, who is also the grandson of Poseidon. Book 7 does have another encounter with Athena, this time disguised as a little girl. And the point of this encounter is to try to help guide Odysseus to the king's estate, meanwhile giving Odysseus this protective mist to garner favor of the Phaeacians. While Odysseus is traveling to the king's estate, the Phaeacians are hosting a festival to honor Poseidon, making it more of a point to not reveal who he is, because he and Poseidon, they aren't on the best of terms right now. When Odysseus made it to the foot of Arute and Alcinous, he threw himself down to the floor and begged for their favor. At first, given that Odysseus was shrouded in this mist when he first came in, the king and queen originally thought that Odysseus was a god, but he rests assured that he was very much immortal and that he was shipwrecked and was needing to return to Ithaca. The king and queen would grant his request and would see him off on one of their crafted ships as soon as possible. As Arute was settling Odysseus in, she notices that the clothes that he was wearing were crafted by her daughter, Nausicaa. Suspicious, she pushes for an identity, but Odysseus would just explain that Nausicaa was just helping him out, and he insisted on coming to the castle alone. And instead of finding this, really weird that Odysseus doesn't seem to have a name for himself, Alcinous just finds this mysterious stranger so clever and immediately offers Nausicaa's hand in marriage. That escalated quickly. So, the next day, Alcinous assembles the Phaeacian elders, and Athena sways the conversation of the assembly about the godlike man that appeared on their shores. This, again, is another example of how Athena is trying to sway favor to Odysseus. So the whole gist of this meeting is Alcinous basically asking the elders for one of their ships to help Odysseus get home, and they agree to provide him with everything that he'll need for the trip. Afterwards, Alcinous arranges a banquet for the elders and Odysseus to celebrate the arrival of their esteemed guest. Meanwhile, a blind bard starts singing the ballad about the fight between Odysseus and Achilles. Everyone is listening in awe of the song, except for Odysseus, who breaks down in tears. The many years of the war that had taken him away from his family. He hasn't even seen his own son since he was a baby, and now Telemachus is a full-grown adult. So his family and son are foreign to him now. And the reason why is because of this long conflict that he just wants to leave behind. Noting the grief of Odysseus, Alcinous stops the feast and wanted to change the mood by moving on to the games. The games consisted of a lineup of boxing, wrestling, throwing, basically the Olympics, and Odysseus is asked to participate in the games, and at first, he declines. But after his pride was insulted by a younger athlete, he decides to partake and easily takes the win. The Phaeacian athletes get into an argument about what game that they can challenge Odysseus to in order to basically beat him, but this is entirely dismissed by the king. As the party continues and another banquet is held, the same blind bard sings again, this time telling the stories of Ares and Aphrodite. During this performance, Odysseus requests a song from the bard. This song was to be about the Trojan horse, and it was during this requested ballad that Odysseus cries once again, and he reveals to the Phaeacians and King Alcinous that he is in fact Odysseus of Ithaca. And it's at this point that we're finally going to get into Odysseus' account of how he got to where he is now, as well as the main storyline that influences Epic the Musical. Books 5 through 8 aren't specifically named as part of like a book structure, but I'm just going to label this as like the Phaecian arc. And the next set of books, books 9 through 12, is known as the Apologoi, or Odysseus' account of the Trojan War. So now we can finally talk about Epic the Musical. Book 9 was the start of the story of Odysseus' encounter with Polyphemus, the Cyclops that he blinds in the story, but also the main storyline in the Cyclops concept album of Epic the Musical. After the victory at Troy, Odysseus led his fleet to Ismarus, the stronghold of the Ciconians. During this raid on the city, they had the upper hand at first. But because Odysseus' men stuck around for too long when they plundered their riches, the Ciconians were able to overwhelm them with a counterattack. During their retreat, a storm picks up and completely throws the fleet off course, where their ships were redirected to the island of the Lotus Eaters. Now, the Lotus Eaters are a group of people that live on a desolate island that worships a lotus tree that bears fruits that, when eaten, would give a person hallucinogenic effects. The first time that I've actually heard about the Lotus Eaters was actually in the Percy Jackson series, when they went to Las Vegas and got stuck in a casino for 5 days because they were eating lotus flowers. It was the best scene in the entire movie. And that's essentially what happens here because Odysseus' men begin partaking of the fruit, and they just immediately forget about going home at that point. It took Odysseus dragging half of his crew back to the ships for the lotus flowers to stop taking effect, and the men were finally able to focus on getting back home to Ithaca. But this doesn't mean that Odysseus doesn't suffer some losses from the Lotus Eaters, because a lot of his crew members decided just to stick around and stay behind. Ithaca just went Whilst trying to reroute back home, the fleet travels through the murky island territories of the Cyclopses. On approach to the mainland, Odysseus and his men encounter a cave full of livestock and all the food you can imagine. This is the first song of the Cyclops Saga concept album, Polyphemus.
Look at all this food. Look at all these sheep. I can't believe this cave has all this for us to keep.
I've gotta hand it to you both. This is quite the treat. There are enough sheep here to feed the entire fleet.
It's almost too perfect, too good to be true. Why would the Lotus Eaters pass up on all this food?
Hey there!
We're just travelers. We come in peace.
You killed my sheep. My favorite sheep. What gives you the right to deal the pain so deep?
In the song, Odysseus is joined by two other characters, Polites and Eurylochus. Now, in the Odyssey story, Polites is referred to as Odysseus' close friend, but in the actual story, he's only really mentioned twice. Whilst Eurylochus, on the other hand, is a whole different story. In the concept song snippets for Epic the Musical, Eurylochus is seen as opposition to Odysseus, and sometimes is the voice of reason with song samples from Luck Runs Out.
Yes, but how much longer till your luck runs out? How much longer till the show goes south? How much longer till we all fall down? You rely on wit and people die on it. Whoa.
But in actuality, Eurylochus gets introduced in Book 10. But, since we're already here talking about the musical, I'll just kind of pre-explain, right? In Greek mythology, Eurylochus the Same, which yes, that's his official title, is the second in command of the fleet led by Odysseus. Even though Odysseus describes Eurylochus as godlike in the text, he's actually portrayed as unruly, cowardly, and always trying to stir up trouble. Within the Odyssey story, Eurylochus complains most of the time, but when it actually comes to do anything useful, he usually runs from the conflict entirely. Or when he chooses not to run or he can't run at all, he instead makes a completely irrational decision that oftentimes gets him into even more trouble than it was already worth. Later, we will see examples of Eurylochus completely undermining simple instructions by Odysseus and completely screwing over his entire fleet. But we're not there yet. We'll get there. But anyways, back to book 9. The flashbacks in books 9 through 12 will show a pattern of behavior that will often get Odysseus and his crew into deep trouble. And the only reason that they keep getting into trouble is because they stick around where they shouldn't be for too long. As they look around the cave, Odysseus is encouraged by his crew to just take the livestock and leave. But Odysseus decides to linger for some reason, the consequences of which is the return of Polyphemus. Now, in the song, Polyphemus has this deep, shaking, cold voice that comes across as immediately hostile as he mourns the death of his sheep. However, in Odyssey, he's welcoming to this fleet at first, but he becomes hostile when he suspects that these people are here to steal from him. And right then and there, Polyphemus eats 2 of the men and captures the rest to keep them hostage to eat for later. Odysseus wants to take the battle head on, but seeing that his men were eaten so easily by the Cyclops, he chooses not to challenge this just yet. So the next day, Polyphemus releases his sheep out to pasture. Meanwhile, Odysseus finds a wooden staff that he heats up and hardens in the fires. When Polyphemus returns, Odysseus offers the giant wine that he brought from his ship to get the giant blackout drunk. So when the giant is intoxicated, he asks Odysseus his name, to which Odysseus replies, "Nobody." You'll see that another pattern in this story is that Odysseus just outright refuses to tell people who he actually is all the time for some reason, even his own family members. It's weird. As the giant is worked up into a slumber, Odysseus takes action and blinds the giant by stabbing him in the eye with the wooden staff. The giant roars in pain, unable to see. He lashes around, trying to find the man who blinded him. All this commotion would alert the neighboring Cyclopses, which created enough chaos that the men were able to steal the livestock and slink away back to their ships. Whilst the Cyclopses were in a panic, they try to ask Polyphemus who did this to him, to which he replies, "Nobody killed me." As you can tell, Polyphemus isn't the sharpest tool in the shed. It's ogre joke. As he escaped the Cyclops' island, Odysseus reveals that he was the warrior who blinded the Cyclops. Polyphemus took the time to pray to his father to avenge him, for he had been wronged by the king of Ithaca. Now, in the musical, there is a huge face-off where Odysseus poisons the wine and Polyphemus takes out most of the men with a massive club. And this happens during what I think is by far the best song in the entire Cyclops saga, Survive. I'm telling you, if you haven't heard this song at full bass, you have to. It's incredible. It is a new day of recording and everything looks different, but we're going to pretend like it's not. Also, I'm not wearing those claw things anymore because I am pretty sure I'm allergic to the metal, because after filming Wrapped Up on day 1, my hands turned gray. Not ideal. Not ideal of a situation at all. Also, I'm pretty sure they cut off the circulation because I couldn't feel my fingers for a good 10 minutes after I took them off. So, we're not going to film with those anymore. At least not excessively, because they did make me slay, but not for 4 hours. Not for 4 hours. The Greeks set their sails off to the home of Aeolus. In Odyssey, he is the commander of winds, but he is also said to be the king of some sort of floating islands made out of clouds. He is also referred to as the Greek god of wind. Aeolus gifts Odysseus with the bag of winds. Yes, like that one. These winds, when used, will command a western gust that will take the crew back home to Ithaca. After traveling from the home of Aeolus for 10 days, the crew finally is in sight of Ithaca. However, there are 14 more books after this, so as we can predict, something terrible is about to happen. Odysseus' shipmates believe that Aeolus gifted Odysseus with riches that he wasn't telling the crew about. So in retaliation, they rip open the bag of winds and throw the ship off course again, and they end up right back at Aeolus' island. But since the crew had ripped open the bag of winds for selfish reasons like greed, he refuses to help them. Now, from what we see in the musical, Odysseus is fairly respected by his fleet, although there's only been 2 albums so far to show his feats at Troy and the Cyclops, so we might see his crew turn on him later. But overall, Odysseus' crew doesn't really trust each other, like, at all, and are highly suspicious of each other all the time. Especially Odysseus. So because they got overly jealous and purposely rerouted the ships, the crew now had to row by hand to the land of the Laestrygonians. The Laestrygonians are a race of giants. Okay, yeah, Wendigoon, calm down, it's not that serious. The Laestrygonians immediately turned their attention to the crew as their next meal. So they all try to get the hell out of Dodge, but the giants sink most of their ships with boulders, and only Odysseus' ship narrowly escapes. After suffering losses at the hands of the Ciconians, the Lotus Eaters, Polyphemus the Cyclops, and the cannibalistic Laestrygonians, they are now only down to 1 ship and about 50 men. As soon as the only remaining cruise ship escapes, they go to Aea, which is home to the most powerful witch/goddess in Greek mythos, that being Circe. Now, Circe is a minor goddess who is the daughter of Helios, the god of the sun. Odysseus divided the groups of men into 2 groups, one group led by himself, whilst the other would be led by Eurylochus. Eurylochus' group would be the ones to meet with Circe, and the men are all drawn to her beauty, except for Eurylochus. He seems suspicious to approach Circe, but this time his overly suspicious nature would actually prove him right, as Circe would drug all of the men in his group and turn them into pigs. Out of fear, Eurylochus runs off to find Odysseus. Now, it's specified that Eurylochus didn't necessarily see the men get turned into pigs, but I think his flight response was fair enough anyways, cause like, his half that he was responsible for just up and disappeared. So as soon as Odysseus is told that, he immediately takes to finding his missing crewmates. And here is where Eurylochus' complaining starts to show through. Odysseus is pretty upset at Eurylochus abandoning his crewmates, so he just goes off and investigates on his own. While he is going to find Circe, he is approached by a man who offered him an herb to counteract the spell, you know, the one that turns you into a pig. And as you could guess, this random stranger is actually Hermes in disguise. You thought it was going to be Athena, didn't you? When he encounters Circe, she attempts to turn Odysseus into swine as well. But because of the herbs that were given to him by Hermes, her powers are rendered useless, and she is forced to turn over the men that she captured and turn them back into humans. Odysseus is willing to make peace with Circe, only if she reveals the path back home to Ithaca. The witch tells him to go to Hades, the realm of the dead, and speak to the spirit of Tiresias. Odysseus makes his way to Hades, or as you plebeians call it, the underworld. But yeah, anyways, so in order to speak to the dead prophet that Odysseus seeks, he must perform sacrifices to Circe so that she may extract their souls. Circe is just like Shang's son, but there's no tournament, and her weakness is leaves. The sacrifices had to be human, so they decided to sacrifice Elpenor, the youngest crew member. Now, you're probably wondering, why would they sacrifice the youngest member of their crew? It would make more sense to sacrifice someone who is old and doesn't have a lot of youth left, so a lot less usefulness to the crew. Well, the thing is, Elpenor did get drunk and break his neck on the ship, and in ancient Greece, I'm pretty sure a broken neck is a death sentence in and of itself anyway, so I mean, I guess it just makes sense. Tiresias is a blind prophet that worked under Apollo, the god of archery. And there's actually a really funny story in mythos where Tiresias attacked a pair of mating snakes, and the snakes cursed him by transforming him into a woman for 7 years. And I guess he just kind of chilled out as a woman until he went back to those same snakes and just kind of like asked like, hey, can I be a man again? And they just did it, and it was fine. The coochie giveth, the coochie taketh away. So in snippets of Epic the Musical, Tiresias tells Odysseus that he is fated to die.
I am the prophet with the answers you seek. Time, I've unlocked it. I see past and future running free. There is a world where I help you get home, but that's not a world I know. I see a song of past romance. I see the sacrifice of man. I see portrayals of betrayal and a brother's final stand. I see you on the brink of death. I see you draw your final breath. I see a man who gets to make it home alive, but it's no longer you.
However, in the story, his role is to help Odysseus get home and speak to another soul residing in Hades. He also warns Odysseus that he has angered the god Poseidon for blinding his son, and that he should not touch the cattle of the sun god Helios. This is what we call in the industry. Also, he lets Odysseus know that he may return home, however, he will return a broken man, all shipmates lost, and that when he returns to Ithaca, his house will be in disarray. Furthermore, Tiresias also says how Odysseus might have to face another quest, that being carrying his oar inland until he meets with a race of men who know so little about the sea that they think the oar is a fan of a winnow grain. I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea what that means. And it'll be there where these folks that must make sacrifices to Poseidon will help him win back his favor with the sea god. If he does all of that, if he doesn't touch Helios' cows, makes amends with Poseidon, and goes on one final quest, then he can return home and die in peace. This heavy foreshadowing is really weighing me down. I can't seem to hold it on my shoulders forever, but I must, because I am the strongest storyteller in the world. During his adventures in Hades, Odysseus finds that a lot of his family and friends have died and live in the land of the dead. He finds his mother, who he tries so desperately to hold onto, but he cannot touch her as she is no longer flesh and blood. His mother died of heartbreak whilst waiting for her son to return home. Odysseus is struck with grief at the news of his mother's death, but it's about to get so much worse as he comes across his former war comrades, Agamemnon and Achilles. Agamemnon tells the story of his murder, which serves to be a direct contrast to Odysseus, as Clytemnestra is presented in the story as a backstabber and a cheater. Odysseus finds solace that at least his wife is loyal to him. Achilles is there because he was shot with an arrow by Paris, the Prince of Troy. Now, Achilles is pretty indifferent about being dead, which contrasts with how Odysseus mourns him, but his friend assures him that he can rest easy knowing his son is alive and he's living his life to the fullest. Overwhelmed by all the dead people he didn't think he would ever see or encounter again, Odysseus escapes Hades, looking forward to returning home to live the rest of his life to the fullest. Odysseus returns to Aea to bury the sacrificed Elpenor, where he again speaks to Circe, who warns him of the journey ahead. Circe tells Odysseus that he must cross the Sea of Sirens. To avoid their temptation, Odysseus requires that the crew plugs their ears with beeswax. What's so weird about this, though, is that Odysseus really wants to hear their song anyways, so for the rest of the crew, he makes them plug their ears, but for himself, the crew just ties Odysseus to a pole, and the rest of the crew keeps sailing, not hearing anything. Meanwhile, Odysseus is just going feral, wanting to jump to his death into the ocean because of the siren song. And to this day, I do not understand why this man made this decision. From there, they would navigate between the watery territories of Scylla and Kerberos. Scylla is a legendary sea monster who lives within a straight and narrow passage right besides her counterpart, Kerberos. Think Ursula, but instead of being like
part octopus, she has snakes instead of tentacles. And if you thought that was bad, Cerberus is even worse. Cerberus is what I can only describe is like the sandworms from Dune, but giant water monster, and it's awful, and I hate it. Actually, now that I'm seeing more pictures of it in the water, it more reminds me of like the Sarlacc pits, but of watery doom. But after having to pass those two horrible abominations and losing only 6 men, shockingly enough, they only lost 6 after dealing with all of that, they finally make it to Thrinacia, the island of the sun. Now, because of what Tiresias told Odysseus earlier, he really doesn't want to go there, but Eurylochus, the origin of all terrible things that happen in this book, persists that they go anyways. But for some reason, Zeus, being terrible, traps the crew on this island for a month. Food is running low, and they're still trapped on the island. And at this point, with everyone starving, Eurylochus, having the memory of a goldfish, is like, hey, why don't we just eat the livestock here? To which Odysseus reminds him that they can't do that because that's Helios's livestock, and Tiresias told them not to touch them. Eurylochus kills them anyway. Eurylochus persuades the other crew members to disobey Odysseus and slaughter the cattle of the sun, either because Eurylochus has a death wish or he's just really stupid. All my real homies out there hate Eurylochus. Helios finds out about this and is majorly peeved off, so he requests that Zeus, who has already trapped them there on this island, prompting them to then kill the livestock for survival. So technically this is all Zeus's fault, but anyways, Helios wants Zeus to punish them even further by kicking up yet another storm that sets them off course again. Odysseus literally can't catch a break, and most of the time it is Eurylochus's fault. This storm would be one that results in the ship falling apart and the remaining crew members drowning at sea. But as predicted by Tiresias, Odysseus survived and washed up on the island of Calypso, where he remained trapped for 7 years. Something about ancient Greek mythology in the 7 years thing. I'm noticing a pattern. And with that, we are done with the Apologoi. But wait, I'm not done yet. There's more. Books 13 through 20 is the entire journey that Odysseus takes from the island of the Phaeicians back to Ithaca. And it is 7 books worth of this content. When will it ever end? So now we are back to what this story's timeline refers to as current day. Odysseus has just finished telling his story to the Phaeicians, and they all agree to send Odysseus home to Ithaca with way more riches than any that he had lost out at sea. The next day, Odysseus sets sail back to Ithaca. Overnight, as the Phaeacians command the ships, Odysseus sleeps until the ships are docked, to which the Phaeacians carried the sleeping Odysseus and his treasures to shore, and then they returned home. Finally, after all of the heartache of the journey he just went through, Odysseus finally gets back to Ithaca, and he was dead asleep for the last half. What a Chad. When Poseidon finds out his followers helped his own nemesis, he is enraged. He spoke to Zeus, who granted him permission to punish the Phaeacians. And he does this by turning the Phaeacian ship into stone, drowning them at the bottom of the ocean. And from that day forward, the Phaeacians decided to never help a weary traveler ever again. So when Odysseus wakes up, Ithaca is shrouded in this mist. Athena is hiding Ithaca, as she is not done with Odysseus just yet. Just as he is cursing the Phaeacians for dropping him off at the wrong destination, Odysseus is approached by a shepherd who tells him that he is indeed back in Ithaca. Suspecting that this is Athena, he tries disguising his true self, which Athena finds somewhat amusing. She tells Odysseus that he must prepare himself, for his wife is being pursued by suitors, and he must be ready to fight back. There are 6 more of these, and I'm assuming that this is going to be stretched out for a very, very long time. As instructed by Athena, Odysseus hides out in a swine hut, where he encounters the swineherd Eumaeus. Odysseus and Eumaeus were good friends, however, because it had been so long, he originally didn't recognize Odysseus, but he let him inside and fed him anyways. Now, Eumaeus is a workhand in the house of Ithaca, handling their swine and livestock. He laments the loss of his friend and master. He also curses at the new masters that have taken over the castle, the suitors that are after Penelope. So instead of just, revealing who he really is to his friend right away, Odysseus lies once again, this time saying that he is a traveler from Crete. He did, however, say that he was once a part of Odysseus's crew, and that he had traveled throughout Egypt before making it back home. Odysseus would also claim, as this lost crewman, that he had heard rumors that Odysseus was actually still alive. Eumaeus takes a liking to this random stranger and houses him for the night, even offering a cloak for him to use. My only solace at this point is that at least this book was pretty short. Athena returns to Sparta to find Telemachus and Pisistratus. Yep, we are back to these two. She tells them to return home immediately as his father has returned back to Ithaca, and if he is to succeed against the suitors, he will need to join his father in battle. She also warns Telemachus of the plot from Book 4 that the suitors had planned. The next day, Telemachus tells Menelaus that he must return home, and he leaves in a chariot for his ship. In that moment, an eagle carrying a stolen pen swoops down and hands this pen over to Telemachus. Helen of Sparta interprets this as a sign that Odysseus was going to exact his revenge on the suitors. That, or this is just some weird invitation to Hogwarts. When he returns to Pylos, where his ship is docked, a prophet's descendant by the name of Theoclymenes begs to be taken with him. You see, Theoclymenes was fleeing prosecution for manslaughter, and although he is very open about this with Telemachus, and he is very taken aback by this, the man also claims to see the future, so murderer, tell the future. Yeah, he's fine, he can come with us. Meanwhile, in the hut of Eumaeus, Odysseus is trying to extract more information about the suitors. So he speaks about leaving in the morning and going after the suitors himself, which Eumaeus warns would be suicide. From here, we get to learn a little bit about Eumaeus' backstory. Eumaeus was stolen from his home by the Phaeacian pirates. These pirates would take Eumaeus to Ithaca to meet Odysseus' father, Laertes. At the time, Laertes was the ruling king of Ithaca. The king decided to raise Eumaeus alongside his other children. Telemachus returns to Ithaca the next day, and he entrusts the prophet that he brought along to a trusted crewmate, as he makes his way back to the castle. But before Theoclymenes and Telemachus depart, another eagle carrying a dove in its claws flies overhead. The prophet interprets this as a sign that the house of Ithaca will have the strength to fight back against the suitors. Or maybe this is just like another weird invitation to the Hunger Games or something. Telemachus returns to the hut of Eumaeus to find this rugged stranger. Eumaeus suggests that Odysseus, in disguise, should stay with Telemachus, as he was part of his father's crew as one of the last surviving members. But Telemachus can't return to the palace just yet, as he was warned by Athena of a plot to kill him. Therefore, it was up to Eumaeus to send a message to Penelope that her son had returned home. So now father and son are alone, and they both don't even recognize each other, since the last time Odysseus had even seen his son was when he was a baby, and now Telemachus is a grown man. Athena eventually intervenes and reveals Odysseus' disguise. The two of them have a sweet little family reunion as Odysseus recounts all of the events that happened in the Apologoi, which he doesn't recount again, so I don't have to talk about it, thank God. So father and son hatch a plan to take the suitors by surprise. The plan is to have Odysseus go inside the palace dressed as a beggar. Telemachus will hide in the palace and get rid of the armory, so only they know where the weapons are. And as soon as Odysseus is in attendance with all of the suitors, he will then take up these hidden arms and slaughter them all. But before Eumaeus can even reach Penelope to tell her that her son has returned, the news has already gotten word to the suitors, and they're already plotting their next move. Antinous plots Telemachus' death before he has the chance to assemble the suitors together. However, one of the other suitors, Amphinomus, suggests that they wait for a sign from the gods before they do anything rash. But Penelope is overhearing this entire thing, and she goes off on Antinous for plotting to kill her son. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. It's either Antinous or Antinous. I've probably been butchering most of the names in this anyway, so who cares? Telemachus and Odysseus depart for now. As Telemachus returns home, he is welcomed back by his mother. In the palace hall, he meets up with Theoclymenus again, as he invites them all for a feast. He speaks to his mother about what he has learned of his father's whereabouts, but he doesn't reveal to her that he is actually still very much alive and is currently back in Ithaca. However, Theoclymenus has a bit of a big mouth, and he declares that Odysseus is actually in Ithaca right now as they speak. But no one really believes this because there isn't any sign from the gods of this being the case, or, proper concrete evidence. So Eumaeus takes Odysseus into town disguised as a beggar, and at this point the men run into Melanthius. So Melanthius was a goat herd who worked in the house of Ithaca. However, he's also a bit of a jerk. He is tasked by the suitors to find the best goat hide to feed at the festival that they would like to hold for Penelope. Hearing that there was going to be another feast, Odysseus saw this as an opportunity to slip into the castle. However, without knowing who this man is, Melanthius insults the beggar and kicks him in the streets. They avoid fighting him altogether by just letting him act like this big thug as he walks off and just laughs in his face. Melanthius is basically a subordinate to the suitors, so he can't be trusted by Odysseus. They decide to take the intel that they got from Melanthius and head to the castle. In the castle, Odysseus is welcomed by his old pet dog, Argos. As they quietly recognize each other, Odysseus and Eumaeus enter the castle, where they basically get treated the exact same as they did by Melanthius, albeit Antinous is being more brutal with his insults. And it's at this point in the story that Antinous basically presides as the main antagonist. Not that he wasn't already, the bad guy in the beginning, but technically, he's taking charge of the suitors from this point forward, so yeah, he's the main bad guy. He goes out of his way to insult the beggar, and when Odysseus insults him back, he throws a footstool at Odysseus' head. This guy seems delightful. The rest of the suitors laugh him out of the castle, for their plot for revenge would have to be delayed for now. So, as the beggar is laughed out of his own palace, at the same time, a vagabond named Irus shows up. So Irus is basically the comedic relief beggar that the suitors kind of use for entertainment. The suitors thought it would be a funny idea to recreate their favorite installments of bump fights and have Irus box the other beggar, who is actually Odysseus. Athena gives Odysseus the extra strength needed to knock the wind out of Irus. As the emotion increases, Amphimonus, who was the only sane suitor here, toasts to the beggar for being such a fine entertainment for them. He also decides to feed Odysseus, to which Odysseus decides to pull him aside and tell him that trouble is coming, and it would be best to leave the castle now whilst they all have the chance. Athena encourages Penelope to make her appearance to the suitors. Despairing, not wanting to face any of them, she bears it for now, hoping that the prophet was correct about what he had said earlier, about her husband returning to Ithaca. She informs the suitors that she was instructed by Odysseus to choose a husband should he not return home before her son were to outgrow his facial hair. Little do they know that the boy can't even grow hair on his balls, you know what I mean? So, at this point, she's finally taking the request of the suitors by accepting their gifts and attention. And during all of the showering of attention, Athena just starts messing with people and tries to start a riot. She tries to prompt one of the suitors to insult Odysseus, and, of course, Odysseus insults him back, so another stool is thrown at Odysseus' head, but this time, the stool misses and just hits a random handmaiden instead, which then starts a riot that Telemachus has to step in and calm down. I don't know what's up with the goddesses being homewreckers and wanting to start riots. It's ancient Greece, I don't understand. As via their plan, when the suitors all call it for the night, Telemachus and Odysseus remove the arms from out of reach of the suitors. After they hide the weapons, Telemachus retires for the night, but Odysseus seeks out his wife, Penelope. Now, seeing as he is disguised, seeking out his wife as a random beggar probably isn't a great idea, but, This guy hasn't gotten any action in years and was stuck on Calypso for 7 of them, so he's probably just wanting to ensure that he's still got it in the bag. Odysseus speaks to Penelope as once being part of her husband's crew. When she asks this random beggar to describe what her husband looks like, Odysseus describes himself in great detail, which makes Penelope cry. She insists that the beggar stays in her chambers to rest on the floor, but Odysseus is very hesitant at this idea because, obviously, eventually he does allow Penelope's most trusted and loyal nursemaid to wash the beggar's feet. And that maiden was Euryclea. Euryclea is mentioned throughout all of Odyssey as being a close friend to Penelope and Telemachus. However, her role is minor as the nursemaid of the castle. At this moment, when she discovers that the beggar had a scar on his foot, similar to Odysseus, it was there that she discovered the truth that Odysseus was actually the beggar. But Odysseus requests from her that she keeps it a secret for now. When Penelope retires for the night, she speaks to the beggar one last time. She tells him about a dream that she has had, and in this dream, Penelope describes an eagle swooping down upon 20 pet geese and killing them all. After doing this, the eagle perches on her roof and, in a human voice, says that he is her husband who has put all of her lovers to death. Now, Penelope claims that she doesn't know what this dream is supposed to mean, and I mean, like, I don't know, Penelope, I think it's pretty dang obvious what that's supposed to... Ow. This is the final book of the Return to Ithaca arc. Thank God. This part has been so drawn out, and I am just itching to get to the bloodshed, so let's move this along. Odysseus and Penelope had trouble sleeping that night. Before she went to sleep, after explaining her dream in the last book, Penelope explains that she would have to choose a new husband tomorrow. Odysseus at this point is starting to doubt himself, that it would be impossible for him to take on all of these suitors on his own. But Athena rests assured that with faith in the gods, anything is possible. Penelope is still very distraught of the day she has to face choosing a new husband, so she begs for the gods for a swift death should she not join her husband again in this life. The next day was the celebratory holiday of Ithaca that honors the god Apollo. Melanthius is busy gathering goats for the festival at the palace. Again, he encounters Odysseus and tries to pick a fight. To garner the trust of the suitors, the herdsmen all insult Odysseus. All of them, of course, except for Eumaeus. Meanwhile, the suitors plot once again to kill Telemachus. The only level-headed suitor, Amphinomus, is trying to encourage them to call this off, but he is outvoted by the suitors. The banquet begins, and Odysseus makes his attendance in secret as the beggar from before. He sits with Telemachus as the suitors continue to insult and berate him. At some point, one of the suitors starts chucking food at him, to which Telemachus loses his cool and threatens to kill the suitor, to which they all just laugh in his face. In that moment, the walls suddenly are doused in blood. The laughing and joyous tones of the banquets are shrouded in intense fear, and the prophet Theoclemenes predicts that this means impending doom for the suitors, and the doom would take place in the last 3 books of the Odyssey, where Odysseus and Telemachus would enact their revenge. We are in the final stretch of the Odyssey story with the final arc of our story, Mnesterophonia. We start book 21 with Penelope announcing to the crowd of suitors that she will marry the suitor who can string and shoot a bow and arrow through a line of 12 axes. One by one, the suitors attempt to bow and shoot, but they are all unsuccessful. Meanwhile, Odysseus is making more allies in his coup against the suitors. He reveals his identity to Eumaeus and the cattle's cowherd, Philoetus. Oh, and by the way, since I didn't really explain this before, Eumaeus is referred to as a swineherd, meaning he takes care of the pigs. Meanwhile, Philoetus is the cowherd, meaning he takes care of the cows. And Melanthius, who is the lackey for the suitors, is the castle's goatherd. So, technically speaking, all of these men are responsible for taking care of livestock, but just different types of livestock, but they all essentially serve the same purpose of taking care of the farms. But anyways, Antinous is being a bit of a sore loser about the whole bow and arrow thing, so he decides to postpone the competition for the next day so that the suitors can make a sacrifice to Apollo, thus making them better off at succeeding. But there is still one final person that wants to make an attempt at archery, and that was the beggar Odysseus. Of course, the suitors sneer at the beggar, and Antinous is basically trying to put him in his place, like, well, you're just a beggar, you're not in the ranks for this competition, and like stuff like, you're gonna make an ass of yourself, you drunk fools. Stuff like that. Odysseus would out-chad everyone in the room by successfully stringing a bow and arrow and flying it through all 12 axes successfully. All in shock that a typical beggar would do such a harrowing feat. They would soon realize who this beggar truly is. But they won't figure that out until it's far too late.
Book 22 starts off where the last book ends, directly after Odysseus succeeds in his shot. Before the suitors can even comprehend what just happened, Odysseus draws another arrow, and this is where the fun begins. Odysseus aims his second arrow and flies it directly through Antinous' throat, killing him instantly. The suitors are confused, thinking that this shot was a freak accident, but it wasn't, as Odysseus would reveal that he was actually the beggar all along. Needless to say, everyone is passing a brick right now and is absolutely terrified. So now the final showdown begins, with Odysseus having the aid of his son, Eumaeus and Philoetus. They grab the weapons that they hid away from the suitors before to arm themselves, and the cowherd and the swineherd would block out all of the exits and the entrance to the women's quarters so that there was no way out. One of the terrified suitors tried to appeal to Odysseus to spare the rest of them. Eumaeus, who had been the second hand to Antinous, tries to ensure that the rest of the suitors were peaceful and it was only Antinous who was the bad guy. So like, completely throwing his friend under the bus. But Odysseus doesn't buy it for a second, declaring that every single person in this room would not live to see another day. Eumaeus realizes that this appeal to his good character wasn't going to work, so he lunges at Odysseus, only to be struck down by a sword. Amphinomus, the only level-headed suitor there, who Odysseus warned to flee, was cut down by Telemachus, as Athena had prophesied his death at the hands of Odysseus' son from the very beginning. Now, when the men were suiting each other up, they forgot to lock the armory hidden away, which gave the right of opportunity to Melanthius. He broke into the armory and stole the weapons to help the suitors, so they at least had a fighting chance. He makes his first run to the storeroom and takes a few weapons to bring back to the suitors, but his second run to grab more was in vain. He is captured and tied up by Eumaeus and Philoetus. Athena is in attendance of this great battle, but once again she is in disguise. Odysseus and his army of 4 killed several suitors, but it wasn't just suitors that Odysseus was after. He was after every servant that declared the suitors as their new masters. That included Leodis, the castle's priest, the traitorous Melanthius, who was tortured and killed, and the handmaidens who chose the side of the suitors. He first made these handmaidens clean up the massacre before being sent outside to be executed by hanging, and after the massacre, the house of Ithaca was fumigated.
So, the entire time that this whole battle was going on, you're probably wondering where Penelope was. Well, after all of the suitors failed at the bow and arrow competition, Penelope just went to her chambers and fell asleep. So, the entire time that her husband is killing all of these people, she's just sleeping it off like nothing is happening. She is ushered awake the next morning by her nursemaid, Euclea. She is told about the events of last night and is in complete and utter disbelief, until she made her way downstairs and saw her husband and son both alive. She is skeptical at first that this is the real Odysseus, but when Odysseus recounts that their bridal bed was made of the same oak that built their castle, she knows for a fact that it's actually him, and not just a god playing tricks on her. However, this isn't exactly a happy union by any means. I mean, it is, but Odysseus still has to fulfill one final quest, given to him by Tiresias from Book 11. You know, the whole meeting people that know nothing about the ocean and the ore stuff. Also, they just murdered like a whole bunch of young Ithaca nobles, and the families might not be super happy with them about that. So the family needs to go into hiding for a bit. So the next day, Telemachus and Odysseus leave together for Laertes' orchard, cloaked in disguise by Athena as they wander through town. So, the final book of the Odyssey starts a little weird because we cut to Hermes guiding the souls of Hades into their respective afterlives. Meanwhile, Agamemnon and Achilles are arguing who had the most epic death. I mean, it's kind of funny because other than seeing, like, the Suitors in Hades again, there's not really any reason for this whole scene to even be here. We cut back to Odysseus in Ithaca, where he is traveling with his son to Laertes' farm. Remember, Laertes is Odysseus' father, who wasn't seen in Hades when Odysseus visited his mother. So his father is very much still alive. So when Odysseus goes to see his father, he's completely unrecognizable. His father was convinced that his son was lost at sea and had surely died. And to kind of play along with this for some reason, Odysseus again pretends to be someone who befriended Odysseus. Like, come on, dude, at this point, there is no need to be all secretive about everything. Everyone knows that you came back home already. This greatly upsets his father, talking about the memories of his son, to which Odysseus wraps his arms around his father and reveals that he is actually Odysseus, which I feel like he should have done anyway. Whilst father and son have a reunion lunch together, word is spreading of the massacre at the palace. And needless to say, the elders are not happy since most of those suitors were their own sons. Eumaeus, who is Antinous' father, had a bone to pick. He wanted to exact revenge on Odysseus, so they march a small army to Laertes' farm to murder Odysseus. But once again, Athena has favor with Odysseus and spares him of the violence. Only Eumaeus is killed by Laertes, who is protecting his son from the mob. Athena wipes the memory of all the Ithacans of the massacre that took place, as if it never even happened. Odysseus once again takes up his role as king of Ithaca, and peace is restored once more. The story ends with these final stanza. Athena spoke to Odysseus, saying, "Son of Laertes, sprung from Zeus, Odysseus of many devices, stay thy hand, and make the strife of equal war to cease, lest haply the son of Cronos be wroth with thee, even Zeus, whose voice is borne afar." So spoke Athena, as he obeyed, and was glad at heart. Then for all time to come, a solemn covenant betwixt the twain was made by Pallas Athena, daughter of Zeus, who bears the Agus, in likeness of Mentor, both in form and in voice. The Odyssey ends with a total solar eclipse as the stanza reads, "The sun has been obliterated from the sky, and an unlucky darkness invades the world." And finally, we are done. Now, technically, this isn't where Odysseus' journey ends, because there is a sequel to the Odyssey, but technically, it's not written by Homer. The Odyssey, a modern sequel, is an epic poem by Greek poet and philosopher Nikos. You know what? I give up. I don't care anymore. Nikos was one of the many authors to translate the Iliad and Odyssey, and he would make his own sequels to it. I won't go too much into it because that could be its own video in the future, but here's what I really want to get across. When talking about how this story influences Epic the Musical and other epic tales, the Cyclops Saga is referenced as its own set of books in the Odyssey. However, most of the Troy Saga isn't really referenced. Maybe it is in like flashbacks when they're talking about the Trojan horse, but the details about stuff like killing the infant son to Prince Hector, which is what the song Just a Man is about, which this song slaps, it is amazing.
But when does a comet become a meteor? When does a candle become a blaze? When does a man become a monster? When does a ripple become a tidal wave? When does the reason become the blame? When does a man become a monster? Forgive I'm just a man.
Gorgeous. Surprisingly enough, none of that is in the Odyssey story. It's technically in the Iliad. I mean, it's technically in flashbacks with bard characters singing and characters recounting stuff that happens, but for the most part, all of the fine details of like the end of the Trojan War are in the Iliad, not in Odyssey. But you know what? At this point, I have done enough reading that my little ADHD brain can barely even handle. And you know what? Like, I'm tired. You know, I don't want to read another 24 books worth of confusing poems again. Look, I'm lazy bedhead. It's in the name. This was already so much work. But anyways, that's the end. Just remember that epic is still its own thing. It is based off of the source material, but it's clearly telling its own story. And the songs are all bangers, so I highly encourage you to support the project because it's amazing, and I want to see what this little TikTok thing becomes because I'm looking forward to it becoming like this huge thing that maybe ends up on Broadway. Maybe. I don't know if that'll be the case, but that would be so cool. There is planned to be more albums coming out in correspondence to each of the arcs of the Odyssey. So we know we're gonna get songs about Circe as well as Antinous and Tiresias. So I'm looking forward to all of that, and you should be really excited too. The lesson that we can take in all of this, if there is any lesson to take away, is that by the end of the day, my body was a beauty standard at one point. Them Greeks love them thick ladies, you know what I mean? I am a beauty standard, and that is all the confidence that I need. Someone take me to Greece. Anyways, thank you all so much for bearing through this different type of long video today. And I'd like to thank not only Factor for sponsoring this video. We have a sponsor, guys. We made it. This is happening for real. But I'd also like to thank my epic, get it, patrons. Thank you, Rachel, Star M, Bryce Cox, Wendy, Pineapple Foster, the one and only Phineas, and a very special thank you to our $5 supporter, Honey Fawn. Look how cute. Adorable, right? I know, you love it. You love it. This is so good. But that's gonna be it for me. Thank you so much for sitting through yet another one of my hyperfixations. Again. And I will see you guys next time. Bye! You hangy?
It's so proud.
He doesn't get sunlight very often.
Why is this so bright? You look at this all day?
Yeah.
I can barely look outside. How do you handle this?
Got little rat eyes.
Look, I'm in goblin mode, okay? So I'm not very pretty right now. What does this say? I don't know how to read.